If you will, go ahead and open your Bibles to Acts chapter 16. Acts chapter 16. We'll be there in just one moment. My wife was watching TV last night as I made my way to bed, and she was watching Star Trek, the movie Star Trek, and I thought that this kind of falls into my sermon just a little bit. That may sound a little weird to say, but I was looking at this movie, and in part of this movie has the race of people called the Vulcans. The Vulcans are a very insensitive people. Everything becomes logical to them, and so they don't really have the feelings. And the feelings that they have, they keep to a very bare minimum. And they were really teasing young Spock as he was growing up, knowing that he was half Vulcan and half human, and they told him that he was going to have to choose his way. Was he going to be Vulcan and be very logical, or was he going to use that human aspect and show all his senses that he has? And I thought about that this morning. You know, without sensitivity towards others, a human ceases to be human. Part of our entire makeup is based upon our sensitivity, the compassion that we have, the caringness, the kindness, the suffering that goes through, but also the neighborliness that we show, the mercy, the understanding. Any person would live in an earthly hell if they were forced to live in a society where such qualities are absent. In fact, if you talk to people maybe that have been in jail or that have possibly been in prison for any length of time, they say one of the most difficult things for them to try to understand, to be a part of, is the insensitivity that goes on with daily life. There's not the human touch. There's not the human feeling. There's not the compassion that goes with every day-to-day life. How would you survive if you knew no one felt for you? No one cared what happened to you. No one did anything kind or helpful to you. No one showed any mercy or compassion. Basically, love was completely void in your life. What if people laughed at you? What if people hurt you? They rejoiced when you fell. They found pleasure in your abuse. They treated you unjustly, and they deliberately misunderstood you. How would you like that? All of us have had times in our lives where we felt lonely. All of us have times in our lives where we just haven't felt like someone really cared. Understand that there are people that exist in this world today that are like that. There are places in this world that exist like that. We could probably create a place right here without a lot of difficulty. All we have to do is to destroy the sensitivity of a person. If I can take the feeling away from you, if I can take whatever holds your heart, and if I can tear it or break it or cause that to be just torn apart, if I could do that just a little bit, I could cause you to become insensitive and be just like that. You know, there are times when we see the ugliness left when such sensitivity dies. We see the ugliness in somebody's heart when we see the love leave. We become hateful. We show a lot of animosity. We definitely don't want any compassion given to us. We don't want any love, any unity. We don't want anything that We don't want anything that would cause you to stir up the feelings of one another. I've told you the story before about my cousin Jeff, and I think he even spoke of it when he was here, when he was in Romania and going into the orphanages, the quietest orphanages that he'd ever been into, a room full of babies in cribs, but no sound, no crying. If you think about at the hospitals when newborns are born, they cry out. Even behind the glass, sometimes you have the ability of hearing all those babies just screaming and crying because they want that comfort. They want that nurturing. They want to be held. And it doesn't take long before they become used to it. But when babies, as Jeff said, have never been held, have never been cared for, have never been kissed, have never been cuddled, they lose the ability of crying out for that. And so they lay quietly in their cribs. If they begin their life that way, we see time and time again where as they grow up, problems arise because they don't feel that closeness to anyone. They don't feel that nurturing. They don't feel that belief, that building, that place in which they can go to. Angie and I were part of a congregation several years ago where there were a few families, large congregation, but there was a few families that thrived upon love and compassion. They thrived upon wanting to be close to every individual that they could find. I had a good friend that loved to hug. He would introduce himself to you if you were a visitor showing up for the first time, and as he would introduce himself to you, instead of shaking your hand, he would probably give you a hug. Male, female, didn't matter. Old, young, kid, didn't matter. Just loved that embrace that went with that. Had others that always, that as long as I live, they may have turned, and they haven't because they're still friends of mine on Facebook, but they may have turned into the most untrustful, hateful, vengeful people in the world. But at the time that I knew them, they were just so kind. They were so caring about not only their own lives, but they were caring for about every person that they come in contact with. You hardly ever seen any of them, and the whole family. You hardly ever seen the husband or the wife in a bad mood. You hardly ever seen them in a way in which you didn't feel like you could be close to them. And people today take that love and for some reason they feel that they're better off pushing it aside, pushing it away, not wanting that closeness, not wanting that unity one with another, to be able to find a way to show the mercy and the grace that God has so blessed us with. What God has given to us, we are commanded to give to others. You know, it costs to have compassion. It costs us to have kindness and caring and mercy and understanding. Often those qualities can create pain. We don't like the prices and we hate the pain. You know, if the cost of such qualities is too high, if they're too painful, we can exercise the option not to feel and not to care. And if we don't feel and we don't care, we're not going to be together. We're not going to be together. I think it's important when we come together as a band of Christians. Just consider a band, a group. We need the group more than the group needs us individually. Amen. We need to be a part of that group. We need to be a part of that unity. More than maybe the whole needs us individually. That's why we grab together. That's why we group together. It's not a clique, but it's a group of Christians believing the same thing, having the same thought one with another. And by doing that, we want to be open with each other, and we want to be helpful one to another. But in every congregation throughout this world, there are people that don't want to be part of the unity one with another. So who are they going against? Are they going against the brother and sisterhood? No. They're going against the commandment of Christ. So then who would be in the right or the wrong? Would it be the congregation that wants to be unified together and do things one with another, even beyond our worship, or would it be the ones that don't want to take part? Who would be right and who would be wrong? You know, sometimes we cope with high-stress occupations, burnout by distracting ourselves from those who hurt, or sometimes for those that are in need. You know, and that's an easy coping mechanism for doctors, counselors, and ministers as well. There's ways that we can try to find that easy way out. You know, it's certainly a convenient coping mechanism for those that are involved in something like prison work, where they have such tedious labors of working with those that are hardened, that are insensitive. Let's look, if we can, at a situation there in Acts 16, down in verse 19, and actually goes through verse 34. A little background. Paul and his companions were instructed to go into the unevangelized region of Macedonia, to where they were going to preach the good news of Jesus. They went to Philippi, which was a significant, prosperous Roman colony, and on their first Sabbath in Philippi, they went to the riverside to assemble with a Jewish group that were there. Philippi was a Roman colony with special status in the area. It, as a city, was very fearful of any non-Roman religious influence, and that included the Jewish influence. They could have considered the Jewish influence as being a new religion, as being a part of that of that city, or they could have been a very small number of Jewish people congregated there. But whatever the reasons were, they were shown that this gathering was outside the city walls. Perhaps this indicates that influence that the Romans were always afraid of. Paul taught the women that were gathered at this site or this place, and as a result, Lydia, who is a prominent Jewish single woman, whether she's a widow or not, doesn't really tell, she was baptized. And from there, she insisted that Paul and his company make her home, which also gives an indication of prominence in the city of Philippi, their headquarters. Her offer would give this new Christian group status in a Romanized city. One day, a girl that possessed, as the King James Version, a spirit of divination, a spirit, looking in other translations, says that she was a fortune teller. She began following Paul. She was owned by two men who made money off of her. Well, they made money off of what she did, of what she could perform. As she followed Paul and his company, in verse 17, she cried out, "These men are bondservants of the Most High God, who are proclaiming to you the way of salvation." The words she used, the Most High God, are literally translated a Most High God. Remember, this is an idolatrous city. This girl doesn't have the Spirit of Jesus Christ. She's not acting as Jesus' helper. In fact, she may very well have been mocking who they were through what possessed her. Through this, Paul became extremely frustrated with her and her statement that she had made, and he commanded her spirit of divination to leave her. When he did, what did he do? It doesn't say that she was boundlessly thankful for the mercy of that, and the men that owned her didn't come to her or come to them and say how great we are that this is left. No, they got mad. They got upset. Because now she was useless to them in being able to make any type of money. They grabbed Paul and Silas and they took them before the magistrates that were there in the marketplace, and they charged them with teaching customs. Understand, it was illegal for Romans to obey anything that was not under the law. And since they were teaching of customs not under the law, it was a very serious charge in the Roman colony. And as a result, everyone became quite agitated. The group became emotional because of these lawbreakers that were bringing this new thing into their community. They didn't like it. It wasn't part of their natural heritage of where they were coming from. They were mad about this. Without a trial, without a hearing that fell underneath the Roman law, they thought that by living under the law, if you did anything that was against the law, then you became part of the Roman system of judication. But being upset, they allowed their emotions to come to them. They rushed to judgment. They publicly beat Paul and Silas, and they threw them into prison. They placed them in a jail, and they charged the jailer to keep them securely. And this introduced us to a pagan jailer that just had a life of insensitivity. He went through his motions each and every day as a jailer, doing his job. You think that he showed up every day saying, "Hey, how's your day going?" Because it wasn't going good for anybody that he was around. They were in jail. Their freedom had been taken from them. They weren't living comfortable. They weren't living in their homes. They weren't around their family. They were in prison. So naturally, that wouldn't be a part of his morning routine with them. Jailers were not noted for their sensitivity. Now let me make a quick point here. I know many jailers in my life, and all of them are pretty good people. Their job is not great, but we live in a different time that these lived in. Such people were not noted for their acquaintances. Don't necessarily think they wanted to make friends one with another. Causing others to suffer was their job. Acts chapter 16 documents the jailer was a man who was hardened to human suffering to the point he just did his job without noticing. 2 men were brought in the late afternoon, just having been publicly beaten. He had been charged with the magistrates to be able to throw them in jail and keep them securely in that jail without concern for their pain. He does what he's told to do. He makes certain it's impossible for them to escape. He placed them in the foul-smelling, filthy, maximum security section, and he added to their discomfort by putting them in chains and stocks. Now they're in deep bondage. And there sat Paul and Silas, wounded in that foul-smelling darkness, not daring to try to lay down, feet locked in a fixed position, but also unable to stand, unable to help each other. It tells us that there, if you're reading along, the jailer was not moved. He wasn't concerned. He wasn't touched without any conscience. He goes about his business. He finishes up. He goes to his quarters, and it says he falls asleep. In their misery, Paul and Silas sang. And it says they prayed to the Lord they loved very much. And they were singing, praying probably out loud. Because Scripture tells us that the other prisoners listened. In this way, they revived themselves and they lifted their spirit as they were in this terrible condition that they were in. They needed to do something to change the area. They couldn't change the area they lived in, but they could change the demeanor of the place that they were in. Most, if they were in that place, I don't care, male or female, we're going to probably cry, moan. We're going to ache from the beatings that we just had. We're probably going to be as quiet as a mouse because we don't want to raise any more ruckus and cause someone to come and beat us anymore. We're not going to try to draw attention to ourselves. But Paul and Silas did just the opposite. They were basically enjoying the ability of having Jesus that they could turn to. What songs must they have sung? I think sometimes of the beautiful songs that we sing here, the wonderful words that are spoken, and yet some people that live a life of luxury won't even sing. The praises that we give, the sound that God wants to hear come from our voices as we're living the life of Riley. And yet we refuse to sing out. Here in this desperate moments of their lives, where they had every opportunity and probably should have kept quiet in human thought processes, they sang and they prayed to God. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing faith that you see in this portion? They revived themselves. They lifted their spirits as they praised that Jesus loved them so much. We could probably conclude there. We could probably end our sermon with just saying, have you seen that scene? It's a part of it. The insensitive jailer was sleeping in unconcerned comfort. Paul and Silas in horrible conditions. The other prisoners were listening. They weren't harassing them. The Bible doesn't say they were listening to the shouts of, hey, shut up over there. Be quiet. People are trying to sleep. It's in the middle of the night. Didn't you people get beat? Don't you know any better than this? But it said they continually sang. What would you do? With the Spirit that is given to you, what would you do? If you had the opportunity of being able to sing to God, would you only sing to God when things are going great? Would you only sing to God when you're in your best position in life? I can remember as a teenager, if things weren't going my way in the house, or if I'd gotten in trouble, or something was wrong with me on services, I'd fester up pretty hard. I'd cross my arms. I'd soul up. I wasn't going to sing. You couldn't make me sing. I'm so mad. How can I sing? How can I sing in this world which I live in when my mom and dad have grounded me or spanked me or something had gone wrong in my life? Why would I sing? Why would I sing these praises? It shows the immaturity that I had at that time. We're going to look and see in our second service what the jailer did when there was a calamity that came aboard. But I wanted us to begin our worship today by seeing how sometimes we are either Paul and Silas or we're the jailer. We're Paul or Silas or we're the magistrates. We're Paul and Silas, the other disciples, or we're the two that owned the girl that was using her in her fortune telling to make money. And when something came along that was spiritual that caused us to change our entire focus, our entire life, and what we're going to do tomorrow is going to have to be different, instead of understanding the implications of the healing that Paul did, we get mad. Or are we one of those disciples that are following along? Understand, Paul and Silas and the disciples that came together were there unified. Which means outside of going and teaching and worshiping and training others, guess what? They had unity. They did things together. They stayed together. They were one amongst each other. It doesn't really talk a lot about the disciples just bailing out or being on the out fringes of the group of Christians that were unified together. But yet, all throughout the brotherhood today, there are people that are insensitive to the cause of Christ. There are people that are insensitive to what it takes to make a congregation become a church. There are people that don't care. There are people that don't think about the broader picture of what God wants us to be. If He didn't want the unity in the church, He would just allow us all to be freelancers. You preach what you want, I preach what I want, you go where you want, you do what you want. We don't have to come together for anything or for anybody. But dare I say that the Bible does not teach anywhere in it that there was Christians that were not devoted to a church. Nowhere. So what amongst the brotherhood keeps people from being devoted? Inside and out. And who's right? Both can't be. If the Bible is teaching unity, mercy, compassion, and love, and you're living singularly against the grain of the church, who's right and who's wrong? It's going on all throughout this world today. It will continue tomorrow unless we start to understand. Remember how we started our lesson today? Started it with the heart issue. I said we have to take the heart and do something with it. If we could be evil enough to take your heart and to scab it up and to wrap it up and to hide it, and if we could put enough problems in your life for you to just be pushed down in this world and in this society, what's the worst push down place that you could possibly be? Would be jail, prison, lose your freedom, all that we could do, then that would place you into a place where you would probably, almost everybody would say you're justified in becoming a very vengeful, hateful, uncaring, unloving person. That'd be natural, wouldn't it? So then I try to think about Paul and Silas. They just had that done to them, and what do? Instead of hating being in those chains, instead of complaining, instead of crying and murmuring, "Oh God, why could you do this to me? Why didn't you get the other disciples? I'll make sure when we get back unified together, I'll put them in their place, or I'll make sure I won't be a part of them, because this is the outcome that I get." No, it says that they continue to pray, continue to sing, continue to love God through Jesus. Better look inside your heart today, folks. You better look and see where you're coming from. Again, I hate to think to say it, but in the bigger picture, we need the church more than the church needs us. We need to be a part of the church more than the church needs to be a part. But it works both ways. Because once we're in the church, we're part of the church, and when we're part of the church, the part that the church makes up is us. Unless we're not doing what the church needs from us. And then are we truly part of the church? It's a great time, it's a great moment in our life for us to be able to use this to really look at our lives. I'm not judging you. You have to judge yourself. I pray today. Think about the life that you're living. The happiness that you have, all that's going on. If it's going well and great, why would we not be celebrating? When times are bad, what does it tell us to do? Be closer to God. And we celebrate the love of God. He's going to take care of us. He's going to keep us. Even when the world falls apart around us, we're still going to be in the eyes of God. We're unfaithful to Him. We're unfaithful to the church. And when we fail to do so, we ask God to forgive us for that. We ask Him to bring you closer. Bring you closer to you. To choose to be in it.